have a special guest from down under, Melbourne, Australia. We have Edwena Dixon. Hello, Edwena.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Edwena?
Good, thank you.
Maybe, Edwina, you can tell us more about yourself and also your YouTube channel.
Yeah, so my name is Edwena Dixon. I am a mortgage and finance expert in Australia. My channel is really all about helping people to understand the finance industry within Australia and more broadly to be able to help them develop their own personal wealth and to be able to live a richer, fuller life through that knowledge.
In the current situation, the property market is quite turbulent, like up and down. Can you explain more about the condition in Australia?
Yeah, so Australia, I think, has been similar to other parts of the world where before COVID, the market was relatively stable. In Australia, property as an asset class has really held quite well. It's, had continued growth year on year on year. It's quite a strong asset. As we moved into COVID, and during that period of COVID, certainly within Melbourne, we had some incredibly harsh lockdowns. And so when the state opened up, what would happen was there'd become a frenzy almost of people wanting to buy and sell because they wanted to relocate. If they were going to do another lockdown, they often wanted to do it in a home that had more space or had more backyard or was in the country or was part of a different bubble or all those sorts of things. And so during that period, we actually saw property values really across the country increased by just over 30%, which was an astonishingly high percentage, which you can imagine over 2-3 years. It meant that many properties that previously you might have purchased for sort of 800,000, completely different ballpark, even during that period of time. So as people moved around, the property market just continued to boom. We'd get locked down again, and then obviously nothing could happen. And so then it would open up again and it would just boom, just from all of that sort of, I guess, pent up demand, really, from either people wanting to buy and sell or people that were forced to because of personal situations. Now, a slightly different part of the market. Obviously, COVID is sort of, for the most part, done and dusted. And so now the property market has shifted and it started to come back down from there. And we're seeing some reduction in those prices. But at the same time, it's still up from where it was, sort of 3 years ago. And is that going to continue? Well, now we have inflation. And so from the Reserve Bank of Australia's perspective, they're looking at it going, well, they're going to increase, and they have been increasing the Reserve Bank's cash rate. So the same as other parts around the world, the cost of money has gone up as they try to bring inflation down. And so now we're starting to see different people entering the market. The property market itself is slowly, I'd say, starting to stabilize a little bit, but where it goes from here over the next 12 months will be anybody's guess.
And you mentioned just now in 2, 3 years, the price went up 30%. And then this year it came down. Came down how many percent?
Oh, like about 8%. So not back down 30%. It's still up, but it has come down a little bit.
What about the interest rate right now?
Yeah, so interest rates have been all over the place. So we have had 11 rate rises, and we had consecutive interest rate rises, which was done by the Reserve Bank of Australia. So they are the central bank. They started to increase what we call the cash rate. So the Fed, obviously, similar thing where they talk about, the interest rate in America, similar thing. And so that central bank interest rate, we saw that increase progressively. So we've got an enormous part of the population that have come into the property market and they've received finance 2-3 years ago where interest rates were really low. And those were people that perhaps got a fixed interest rate. So a fixed interest rate is where the interest rate doesn't move. It's set for a particular period of time. 2, 3, 5 years. We don't have 15-year fixed or 30-year fixed like in America. We're not that crazy. So we've got an enormous amount of people that are over the next 12 to 18 months, but more specifically the next 12 months, they will be coming off a fixed interest rate. And where they've had repayments and an interest rate of potentially as low as 1.8%, all of a sudden their interest rate is going to be closer to 6%. So an enormous jump that people need to financially prepare for. And many people have, a lot of people have certainly started to recognise that once that fixed rate period finishes, their mortgage repayments will be a lot higher than what they are used to. They perhaps won't be able to go out to nice restaurants as much anymore, which is always a shame. And they perhaps won't be able to go on holidays overseas. So in Australia, as you would be very aware, a lot of Australians go to Indonesia for holidays. It's our second home almost. So there may be less tourism that happens, from that perspective. But it's going to be a shift. And for some people, it certainly has. For others, it really doesn't make too much of a difference.
The time comes like 12 months, another 12 months, they have to prepare themselves to pay a higher mortgage. Will there be a shift, like there are people like selling off their properties?
There
because they can't afford?
potentially will be. Australians are quite unique in that what they call the default rate, so the amount of people that default on their mortgage who simply can't afford it, so they stop paying it for it, is quite low. So there was research done a number of years ago where it was shown that somebody will sacrifice a lot of other things and they will miss out on payments for car loans or, for mobile phones or for other things in their life before they stop making mortgage repayments. It is one of the things that for Australia, and it's part of why the Australian economy and Australian banks are viewed globally as being some of the most secure in the world, because the rationale here is that is the very last thing that you stop making payments on. And so there may be some element of hardship that does happen, but at the same time, interest rates increasing, the purpose of that was to bring down inflation, which ultimately is, to punish the people and have them stop spending so much money. So that will certainly be the case. And I think the outcome ultimately will be we'll see potentially a further dampening in property prices. We're not going to continue to see the 30% over the next couple of years. That was certainly an anomaly, but it really will mean that over the next couple of years, perhaps the growth that would have happened, that may not be there. Across the board, we'll probably still see it in certain areas, but not nationally in the same way.
Will the younger generation have the capability to take the mortgage?
They will. One of the things that has become quite evident is that what we call first home buyers, so people that they've never purchased property before, they're looking to buy the very first home to live in, their perception of what that first property should be is very different from their parents' perceptions. So what I would say is 40 years ago, when people were buying properties as their first home, it was whatever they could afford. They would accept whatever they could afford. If they had to live an hour from where they worked, they would do that. Whereas now, a lot of the generation that are first home buyers, a lot of them expect that they will be able to purchase what their parents lived in when they were perhaps teenagers, or the homes that they live in now. And so that perception of what a first home buyer purchases as their first home is very different to what previous generations viewed as their first home. Previous generations thought of, that scrappy little shack style unit or apartment that they did up and, then they sold that and they had a bit more money and they bought something slightly bigger, and then they bought something slightly bigger again. Whereas the newer generation, they want to just go straight to that bigger property. So I think what we're going to see is a realignment between what people in reality can afford and what's available on the market. And really that shift is going to take some time to come through.
Because like high-end properties, more polished kind of property, it will be more expensive. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether they can really afford it or not for the younger
No,
generation.
and certainly here where you start to see a market, a property market starting to change is those really high-end properties. They sit on the market for a little bit longer. Instead of taking a week or two to sell, maybe they're taking a month to sell, or maybe they're taking 2 months to sell. At the same time, at the bottom end of the market, the same thing happens. Lower socioeconomic houses, they're still available for sale, but they might sit on the market for that little bit longer as well.
And for properties, we have like apartments, landed properties. Which are the slow-moving properties right now?
Depends on whereabouts you are. So at the moment, we're seeing a fair amount of growth in the apartments and unit space, and that is because people are readjusting their perceptions of what they can purchase and what's a good purchase to make. And so there's more slowing down in the housing sector as a house, but there's still strong growth within good quality apartments and units. That really is a changing of perceptions, because for the most part, most Australians will buy a house with land, because here it's the land that appreciates in value, not the house. So when the value is done on the property, it's more to do with the land component than the building itself. Again, slightly different to the way I think it works in other parts of the world. But you would know, Daniel, I mean, you've got property, I think you said, in the UK, so
Yeah.
different again.
Yeah, it's the different game. And I find that there's a lot of foreigner, like Australia is one of their favorite country to invest. Like lots of foreigners coming into Australia to buy properties. Maybe you can talk about foreigners like investing in Australia.
Yeah, so a big part of why a lot of foreigners want to invest in Australia is because of the stability of certainly the asset class. So property is a very stable asset here, and so that knowledge, if you buy a property here in 10 years' time, it's probably doubled in value. And so a lot of foreigners look at that and go, fantastic, that's a great place to put my money. I'm going to get a consistent return, which you don't necessarily always get that in every investment. I mean, that's a part of your risk assessment and working out whether it's worth the risk. But a lot of people will look at Australia and really view purchasing property, even with the additional taxes foreigners do pay to enter the market here, when they're looking at the investment returns that they could be getting in their own countries, often it's worth it. It's still a lot better than what they would be looking at if they invested in other countries. So there are a lot of foreigners that do purchase here. Usually it's within the capital cities. So it really is Melbourne and Sydney. Sydney, by far, everyone would prefer to be there. But Sydney is some of the most expensive property in the world. It's up there. I think the last time I looked at it, it's more expensive than New York. It is extraordinarily expensive to get into the Sydney market.
As you mentioned, foreigners coming to Australia to buy properties, there will be different taxes, more taxes being imposed on them. Like, can you please explain more on the taxes? What kind of taxes?
There's additional, so we've got what they call state revenue tax. So depending on where you purchase a property in the country, any of the different states, you would pay
Let's
what they
say
call.
let's say Melbourne. Let's say
Yeah.
Melbourne.
Yeah, so the State Revenue Office of Victoria, they have a stamp duty. So stamp duty is a percentage of the purchase price that you then pay to the government when you first purchase that property. And what then happens is, if you are a foreigner, you then are paying additional percentage of that purchase price. And the way that the taxes work, and especially the stamp duty component, it's done on a sliding scale dependent on how expensive that property actually is.
Let's say the foreigner buy the property and they're renting it out. They have income. Do they declare like income tax? Do they need to?
Yes, because they're earning the money here. So they then
Yeah.
pay a tax here as well. Yes, because it's money that they've earned within Australia.
So the payment of the income tax is different from the locals or the same?
I am not an accountant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it is different. What it specifically is, I'm not sure. Again, a lot of it depends on how much income you're actually earning, because there are thresholds for how much you then pay based on your threshold.
We were in this PTYA, Part-Time YouTuber Academy class. Like, how do you want to take it to the next level that applies to your job?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So, for us, we do a lot of social media as part of our company. You know, we specialize really more in finance for professionals and across the country. So we work with anybody within Australia. What has been interesting, I think, as part of the PTYA Academy and being able to take it to that next level is really understanding the longevity of a YouTube video and how what you can put out today may still be relevant and still may be viewed 2-3 years from now. And as long as the information isn't so specific to a period in time, then it can still be very useful and very valuable to people in the future, which I think that to me is probably the element to YouTube that I hadn't fully grasped until doing this academy. I think realizing now that there are certain topics that I've noticed don't do great on YouTube, but they do well, and that information does well on other platforms. And really kind of understanding a big part of it is there just isn't as much interest for those things on YouTube, because I think people have the understanding that if you're on YouTube, you're perhaps looking for more generalized information, not detailed, specific, time specific information.
Let's wrap up things. Like, what do you want to give? What the message that you want to convey to the audience as a take-home message?
Yeah, I think probably that property and finance, certainly in Australia, is one of those interesting things where a lot of it is open for negotiation. You know, if you're thinking of purchasing property in Australia, if you're wanting to get into the property market, then it is so nuanced, and there's actually a lot more that's involved in it than perhaps what people actually realize there is. And I would say if it is an area that you're wanting to get into, at the end of the day, speaking to a professional will show you where all of those, you know, different quirks are that you need to be mindful of and pay attention to. Is that unique to Australia? I don't think so. But at the same time, I think the one thing that people can really take away is that ultimately it is a very developed industry with a lot of nuances, and having a guide actually just guide you through it is definitely the way that you'll get best value for money.
So if I ever come to Melbourne, I'll let's meet up.
We should, yes, most definitely. Yes.
And talk about properties.
I would love that. Yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Edwena. And those who wants to learn more about property and her YouTube channel, check the link below the description box. So thank you so much for your time,
Thank you.
Edwena.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. You're most welcome. I'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye.